Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today I've got Jim Kraus, and we're going to be talking about buyer personas. What is a buyer persona? Now, many of you will think you already know what one is, because I did until I read Jim's book. Buyer personas gain deep insight into your customers' buying decisions and win more business, published through Wiley. I thought I knew all about buyers personas until I read this. But we're going to talk about that today. So, Jim, where can people find you?
Hey, Tim, great to join you today. Two places, really. One is you can find me on LinkedIn, Jim Kraus, Kraus. We constantly trying to put out content around understanding buyers, understanding the buying decisions they make. And then the other place is buyerpersona.com, and that's our website. And we also try to put resources there and describe some of the things that we do for our clients.
So Jim, first question is, why did I think I knew all about buyer personas, but I didn't?
Right. Yeah. So buyer personas is a kind of a loaded word, right? I mean, they've been around for a couple of decades now.
I've been around for a couple of years, Jim. Yeah.
Yeah. So exactly. So yeah. So when you hear the words buyer personas, most people think of the fictional avatar variety where you're profiling an individual or a role that's important.
Well, it's usually Jim Kraus. He wears a blue shirt. He has some wardrobes behind him, and it's as flimsy as that.
Right. Yeah. Oftentimes it is, and it doesn't. The challenge with those types of buyer personas are they're only useful to a point, right? Because if you're marketing and selling, it doesn't tell you a heck of a lot about how do you influence the buying decision that Jim Kraus is making, right? If I own a blue shirt and my age and my education and even my overall priorities, it doesn't tell you how to influence me when I'm making a very specific product or service decision. So that's the kind of the traditional view of buyer personas, and hopefully in our discussion today we can kind of expand that thinking to something that might be a little more useful for your audience.
I saw the famous one on LinkedIn today, where there's a picture of King Charles and a picture of Ozzy Osbourne, and in fact they're the same buyer persona. They're divorced, they live in a castle, etc.
Yeah.
So why is it that buyer personas are not working?
Because they don't tell you anything about how to influence a buying decision, right? So, the example I always kind of give is if you have a buyer persona of, let's say you have a buyer persona for a CIO, right? Let's say you sell some type of technology product or service, and for good cause, you think the CIO is going to be involved in that buying decision. What is going to influence that CIO and what they're going to value is going to vary depending on what they're buying. So if they're buying a CRM software, for example, what they're going to care about and what their fears and concerns are about that purchase and all the decision criteria they're going to use to evaluate their options is going to be very different than if they were looking at a piece of security hardware, as an example, or if they were looking at a database piece of software, right? So the key thing is we want to migrate away from the fictional avatar of an individual and really start to focus your buyer personas on understanding a specific buying decision that you're trying to influence. That's the key difference.
So how do we do that? Because you talk about this a lot in the book, don't you? This is the essence, really, of the secret sauce of the book, isn't it?
Yeah. So the way to do it, we can talk about what's included in a buyer persona, or what should be, but the real way to build a buyer persona is to actually go talk to recent buyers. They are the expert in this exercise. And what I mean by recent buyers are these include individuals and organizations that have bought from you. Your current customers certainly are in the mix, but you also want to make sure that you talk to buyers that never considered you and bought a competitor alternative, or considered you and didn't choose you, right? Because you want your buyer persona to be based on the market that you're targeting, particularly if you're focused on new customer acquisition. And that is the way to do it. They're really the only source of this information. It's not available information in AI, large language models, and there's certain inherent flaws or deficiencies if you rely just on your sales force or just on your own customers to get those type of insights.
Because we've all been in the situation, haven't we, where the salesperson has said they bought it on price.
Yeah.
And price may have been a level of factor, but it's pretty meaningless about what was it, because the price was too high, the price was too low, or and people don't necessarily buy on price.
Correct. Yeah. The limitation you have with sales teams is a couple of challenges if you rely on your sales teams to develop your personas. One is they only have a certain view of a segment of the market, right? The ones that they're actually interacting with. So they can't represent the whole market that you're targeting.
Yep.
Number two is they do have biases, as you said, right? There's going to be some inherent biases in what they say. Three is they just don't have purview, as well as they know their prospects. They don't know the ins and outs and everything that went on from the moment a buyer had an initial need for something until they made a decision. They have no way of knowing everything that happened within that organization and the mindset of that organization and all the behaviors that they went through during that buyer's journey. The sales teams just don't have that point of view.
So who should within an organization actually define the personas?
So what you want to do is when you're defining a buyer persona, again, buyer persona provides deep insights around a buying decision, is you want to talk to individuals that are actually involved in that buying decision. And it could include different roles, right? It's fine to talk to, let's say you have a product or service and there's 3 different roles within an organization that you feel are going to have some say in it and are going to be involved in researching and evaluating options. Talk to all 3 types of roles. You want to get all of their inputs. But the key thing is that they have recently made that decision in the last 3 to 12 months, and that they've had a lot of involvement in it, so that when you do talk and interview them, they can tell you firsthand knowledge very deeply everything that was important in the organization and everything they wanted to know and everything they wanted to experience during their buyer's journey to feel confident and assured in whatever decision they ultimately made.
Because you go into this in a lot of detail, don't you? As well as the interview technique and the way that you're asking questions, because you use a particular case study in here, don't you, about MRI scanners?
Yep. Yeah. So the approach that you want to use, and in the book we have an example. We did a buyer persona for an MRI machine, which is those large tube-like machines. And what you want to do is there's really only, most of the interviews that you want to do typically last 30 to 40 minutes. They're not surveys. We're not asking people to rate or rank things.
You're not selling either.
No, not selling at all.
Yeah.
Right. You want to approach these interviews as a journalist would, right? So the buyers you're interviewing have a story to tell that you're hanging on every word, right? You want to know everything that happened from the initial trigger to the time they made a final buying decision and all the steps in the process and everything that was important. So we only ask one scripted question at the very beginning of our interviews. And we say, take me back to the day when you decided that you needed X, and X would be whatever product or service you're focused your persona on, and tell me what happened. And from there, you prompt and probe and question so that you understand what are the triggers, what are the key outcomes they wanted, how did they figure out who they were going to consider, how many competitors did they consider, how did they winnow down their choices, why did certain competitors get eliminated while others stayed in contention, and how did they arrive at that final choice, and what was really important to them in those key moments as they winnowed down their options and made that decision. Those are the key kind of moments of truth in the buyer's journey that you want to understand very deeply. And you can only understand that by asking open-ended questions and also probing, right? So if they give you an answer, they say, hey, it was really important that we could improve efficiencies by buying this particular product. You want to go ahead and ask them, well, tell me a little bit more about that. What about if improving efficiencies was important, and how did you think this solution was going to help you, right? Because that's where the real nuggets of insight are.
And you also mentioned the point that if they say you wanted it to do A, and they thought that actually your product didn't do that, you shouldn't suddenly turn around and say, but it does do that.
Right.
Because in effect, what you're doing is immediately you've destroyed the trust of that meeting.
Correct.
Which is, it's not a pitch. It's not a sales pitch.
Correct. Yeah. You want to go in there as an unbiased, objective third party. The thing that I always tell our researchers and our interviewers that do these interviews quite well is really you want to approach it with a complete open slate. You want to go in there basically saying to yourself, I have no idea what this particular buyer is going to tell me. my whole job is to ask good questions and prompt and probe so that I understand everything that was important in this particular decision, that I know the things they were excited about, that I know their fears and concerns. And if you can have them articulate that, right, and just keep questioning to understand, question for understanding, by the time you get to the finish of your interview, if you feel like you have a really good understanding of everything that happened, you've done your job, right? And as you said, Tim, we're definitely not trying to sell anything here.
And to actually get those meetings to talk about that, I guess you've actually got to approach people who may be customers, but you actually may be approaching people where you lost business, which sometimes is hard for organizations, isn't it? Because there's an emotional bias there, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, it's so important to go outside of your current customer base. Again, particularly if you're focused on new customer acquisition, you have to talk to people, to buyers outside of your own customer base. A couple of quick words or tips of advice I can give it to you. There are ways to do it, right? And we talk in detail about, and that was in the book, and we do this as part of our business. But there are ways to partner with different types of recruiting firms that can help you find them, and develop what we call screening questionnaires to qualify people in terms of who you really want to talk to and who you might not want to talk to based on, did they make that buying decision and were they heavily involved in it or not? That's the key. The other thing I would say too is, when I talk to marketers, sometimes they are a little nervous about doing these interviews because they're nervous about whether the buyers want to do them. I can assure you that buyers love doing these interviews. And the reason for that is you're asking them all these questions about a decision that was really important to them, that they cared an awful lot about. And the nice thing about these interviews for them is they don't have to pontificate or come up with grand thoughts. Really, what they're telling you is what actually happened in their organization and what was their mindset. So it's almost cathartic for them to talk about, and it's easy for them to talk about. So they actually, we usually do 30-minute interviews, and we often go a little bit beyond that, and they're happy to stay on the call with us and do them if they have the time, because they do really enjoy them.
Yeah, and you go into a lot of detail, and so you also talk in the book about how you take that information and how you turn that into data, don't you? So how you actually come up with the persona rather than just looking at Jim and saying, "Where's a blue shirt?"
Yeah. So once you do these interviews, let's say you do a set of 10, 12, 15 buyer interviews, you want to look for patterns in the data across those interviews. And there's really 5 areas of insight that should comprise your buyer persona. And I'll just quickly tick through them. The first one is called priority initiatives. And these are the triggers. These are the things that are challenges, needs, circumstances that are making your buyers first look for your particular product or service. You want to know what those are. The second one is success factors, and these are outcomes or benefits that your buyers want from this particular purchase. The third one is perceived barriers, which are all the fears and concerns that buyers have about making this purchase or making this purchase with certain providers. The fourth one is decision criteria, which is what are the key questions that buyers are going to ask when they're evaluating their options and winnowing down their choices. And the fifth and final one is buyer's journey, which is steps in the process. Who are the key influencers and what are the information sources that they use and trust to identify this information? So that's really the core of your buyer persona. The other thing I would really encourage everyone to do as part of their persona is, when you identify these insights in these 5 buckets, is to really include buyer quotes, right? Yeah. Actually, what buyers are actually saying, because they add such a deeper understanding of your buyers, and they also increase the credibility of your buyer persona tremendously.
Because you talk in the book about how you create the priority initiatives, the success factors, the perceived barriers, decision criteria, and the buyer's journey. And you say this is what your spreadsheet should look like, and then put the quotes to basically back that up. Because you also say in the book, you will present this and people will say it's not like that.
Correct. Yeah, it's amazing. My favorite meetings are doing buyer persona readout meetings by far, because the first thing I always tell everybody right at the start is, the buyers are the star of this show. It's not me. It's not you. It's not my organization, your organization. We are going to be focused on your prospective buyers, and we're going to crawl into their minds and do a forensic understanding of everything they really care about. And the beauty of the buyer quotes is it instantly adds credibility to your buyer persona. Like it literally takes, you go through a couple of insights and everybody's paying attention, right? Because it becomes very clear very quickly that these are the folks that you want in your sales pipeline and that you're trying to sell to. The other great thing about the buyer quotes, even more importantly, is you get such a deeper, nuanced understanding of your buyers when you're developing marketing strategies and content. You can much more easily develop content that's going to connect with them. The other thing, if you really want to use these buyer quotes, is to analyze them to understand the words, phrases, and terminology that your buyers use. So like when you're developing messaging, for example, it prevents you, or it inhibits you, or it eliminates the probability that you're going to use fancy marketing speak kind of words like optimize and enhance and everything. Rather use words that your buyers are using, because that way they're going to understand you, and you're going to create a connection with them, because they're going to feel like, hey, I understand these folks. They seem to understand my challenges. They're talking about capabilities in a way that I can understand it. That means something to buyers.
Yeah, and you pull out a whole bunch of things. So I wanted to show this, so that there's a whole bunch of slides that this is how you should present it. But also you say that there's all these strands that you can pull out, which is, for example, all of a sudden you're probably looking at different keywords. You're able to write content in a way that's going to resonate with your people. As I see stuff on LinkedIn and I don't know what they're talking about.
Yep.
And I've been in IT a number of years, and I just don't know what people are talking about. I'm going to pick up. Anne's actually come up with a question. How do you find getting those call schedules, as we're having some trouble getting our clients to confirm the call?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I mean, the hardest thing that we do when we build buyer personas, when we work with organizations, is identifying, recruiting, scheduling, and getting the interviews done, right? Because you need to find the right buyer and the right organization that recently made this buying decision. And then you also, once you identify them, you need to make sure that they actually show up for the calls. So this is quote unquote market research, right? That's what these interviews are. And market research has been around for decades. So the best way to do it is to pay them, right? Because you're paying them for a service, they're giving you value by talking to you and telling you everything that happened in their buyer's journey. That will not bias them at all. When you go into the interview, you literally say to them, your answers are completely anonymous. We are not going to identify you or your organization in any way. That gives them security, which it should. And most people are used to doing these types of quote unquote research interviews. They've been called for other things. So you definitely want to pay them, or at least provide some type of value to them. And then the other way is just to do good confirmation calls, right? So if you have an interview that's coming up, it's great to send an email or even make a call the day before and confirm they're okay with it. If they do need to reschedule it, be very receptive to that. Just say, hey, look, this is really important to us. We really want to talk to you. If you need to reschedule, a couple of days out or next week, no problem, right? And do that, and they'll appreciate that.
And thanks for that, and I hope that helped you. So Jim, we've collected the data, we've had the interviews. What is that when we actually then decide we need to change the strategies, or what should we be doing with it?
Yeah, so there's a number of ways that organizations can use buyer personas. I mean, because the information is so pragmatic from a marketing and sales perspective, you're going to start using it in ways you may not have even originally thought of to use, right? But ways that often they use it is things like, one of the things we always recommend is to do what I call a mapping to develop value proposition themes. And what this entails is, if you think of a simple Venn diagram with two circles, your one circle is your buyer's wants and needs. And these are all the insights that you just developed for your buyer persona. Those are great. We want to know what those are.
Yep.
The right side of it would be, the other circle would be, what are your capabilities as an organization? Yep. What are your features? It's great to do an intersection of those two circles. And in the middle of those are your value proposition sweet spot, because it's at the middle point where you have capabilities to meet your client needs, where you can develop value proposition themes around those. And now you can go out to the marketplace, and your sellers can go out to the marketplace feeling confident that, A, we know our prospects are going to care about this stuff because we did the work to find out. And B, we did this overlay exercise, and we're confident we have capabilities and we have a story to tell to do it as well. Another thing I'll mention, because we talked about it earlier around messaging, and we're doing a lot of this lately, is it's wonderful to use the transcripts. You want to record and transcribe these interviews. It's wonderful to use what I'll call the raw interview data to help you define and identify these terms and words and phrases and ideas that buyers use, because then when you're doing messaging, it lets you really connect with your buyers in a useful way. And you can use human intelligence to do that analysis, and AI is a wonderful tool to help you do some of that analysis too, based on the raw unstructured data that you've collected.
Jim, thank you so much for coming on and talking about the book, Buyer Persona, Gain Deep Insight into Your Customers and Buying Decisions and Win More Business. If I wanted to buy one, where could I get one?
Amazon and Barnes & Noble both have it. You can buy those books online at either place.
Excellent. And where can we find you, Jim?
Two places. You can either find me on LinkedIn, Jim Kraus. We try to post as much content as we can around buyers and the buying decisions there. And buyerpersona.com is our website, and you can find a lot of additional information there as well.
Thank you so much for coming on, and thanks for the comments. And yes, what I will do is I will send you the link to YouTube, because I put this on YouTube afterwards. So I will put it in the comments on LinkedIn. So I will do that. Jim, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your book. It's an excellent. And Anne has the book too. So I haven't sold one, unfortunately, but she is using the resource.
Right. Thank you, Anne.
They're obviously fans of yours, Jim. So thank you so much for coming on and talking, Jim. It's excellent, and it's an excellent book as well. It made me realize that there was more to buyer personas than I thought.